After finishing my video covering which Genshin Nation had the most characters of each weapon type, I began to wonder a different but adjacent question. Instead of looking at the popularity of weapon types amongst the nations, I wanted to find which one was the most popular amongst the elements. So I looked into it and this is what I found. Starting off, there are 24 characters that wield swords when counting each playable MC as a character each, and the element with the most sword users turns out to be Hydro, with 5 Hydro Sworders: Barina, Ayato, Nilu, Xingqiu, and Hydro MC. The element with the least amount of sword users is Pyro, with only Benny holding down the fort on his own. Moving on, the element with the most Claymore users is Pyro with 4 characters total: Diluc, Gaming, Xinyan, and Dea, and the element with the least is of course Hydro with no one. If we put Hydro aside though, the element in second last are Dendro and Anemo, with only Kave and Sayu as the sole Claymore wielders aligning with their element. Next up, the element with the most polearm characters is Pyro, this time with 5 characters, completely clearing any competition they may face, with Arlecchino, Hu Tao, Chevrus, Tome, and Xiangling. The element with the least polearm users finds a tie between Hydro and Anemo, with Angsty Boy being the only Anemo polearm and Candace being the only Hydro polearm. Then the elements with the most Catalyst users are both Anemo and Hydro with 4 characters each, Anemo having Angsty Boy 2, Shanyun, Heizo, and Sucrose, and Hydro having Mona, Nuvolet, Kokomi, and Barbara. The element with the least Catalyst users is Geo, with Ningguang being the one and only Geo Catalyst. And finally, there are the bows, which probably has the least definitive answer, as out of the 17 characters that wield bows, the amount of characters that align to any element is 3, but Electro, Hydro, Pyro, and Cryo all have 3 characters: Electro with Fischl, Sara, and Sethos, Hydro with Ginger King, Sijuin, and Yalan, Pyro with Linny, Yuimiya, and Amber, and Cryo with Ganyu, Diona, and Aloy. And on the other side, looking for the element with the least bow users, it's thankfully a lot simpler because as the only Geo bower, Goro places Geo as the element with the least amount of bow users. Now, while we answered the question that way, another question that people had when I looked at the nations is whether any of the results change when looking at the proportions of characters of an element against the total number of characters wielding a certain weapon type. For example, taking bows which had an in-safe 4-way tie, if we instead look at the percentage of characters that are bow users in comparison to the entire element's roster, do things change? Let's start off with our most egregious example. If we instead look at the percentage of bow units to the total amount of characters of one element, we see that tie completely disappears, as 23.08% of Hydro's entire roster carries bows, making it the most popular when valued by this metric, pushing Electro, Pyro, and Cryo off the top spot. And in the battle for the least used, Geo still remains the least utilized. Looking to the rest of the elements, we see that Hydro is still proportionally the most used weapon among sword users, and Pyro still holds the least users. The answer for Claymores changes from Pyro with only 26.67% to Geo, whose roster is 30% Claymores, with Hydro and its 0% not moving much. Second last place now goes to Anemo instead, with Dendro's proportioned percentage being 1.7% higher. Looking at Polearms, Pyro still retains its place as its highest user, and Hydro takes last place in the tie against Anemo with only 7.69%. And to finish it off, the tie between Hydro and Anemo for the most amount of Catalyst users is settled, with Anemo cinching top place with 33.33%, and the bottom place still remains as Geo. But we're not done there, because there's still one more way to look at this question. While we just figured out what is the most popular element of each weapon type, what about which weapon type is the most popular amongst the 7 elements? Well, let's see.
If you made it this far and are interested in supporting the channel, memberships are available for only $1 USD. For that, you get a shout out at the end of every video. Join now!
With the wins taking us first to Anemo, the 2 most popular weapon types are Catalyst and Swords at 4 apiece. Now, I can already hear you thinking, Anemo and C shouldn't count, Catalyst should win, and yeah, I kind of agree with you. So if you remove the Traveler from the equation, then yes, Catalysts stand alone as the most popular weapon type. And what is the least popular? It's Claymores and Polearms with 1 each, Xiao and Sayu. Now, applying the same methodology of percentages like last time, we see that Anemo proportionally has more Catalyst users when comparing the number of Anemo Catalysts to total Catalysts against the number of Anemo Sword users to total sword users. We also see that the tie for last place between Polearms and Claymores is broken, with Polearms being roughly a mere 0.4% lower. Rocking over to Geo, we run into a pretty similar case, as the most popular weapon types are Swords and Claymores, but Swords only compete due to Geo MC, so technically, once again, depending on how you look at it, the most popular weapon type in Geo is Claymore alone, or Claymore and Swords. The least popular is tied between Bows and Catalysts, with Goro and Ningguang respectively. Looking to the percentages, Claymore solidly takes takes first place by itself, and the tie for least used stays the same. Then thundering over to Electro, and yes, swords once again only compete due to the Traveler. So depending on how you look at it, the most popular weapon type in Electro is swords alone, or Claymores, bows, and swords. The least popular weapon type of Electro is tied between Catalyst and Polearms with only 2 users each. Percentage-wise, Claymores become the absolute standout most used, and Catalyst take least used by itself. Blooming up next, Dendro, where, yeah, just like the other elements, the inclusion of the Traveler skews the results, except this time, even if the Dendro MC is removed, there still isn't a definitive most used weapon type, as swords, polearms, catalysts, and bows have 2 characters each, so really, this one comes down to whether you include the Traveler or not. Thankfully, this does narrow down the least used as there's only 1 weapon left, Claymores, with only 1 guy. Percentage-wise, the tie now becomes between swords and polearms, and Kave keeps Claymores as the least used weapon in Dendro. Swimming over to Hydro, the curse of the Traveler lingers for 1 more element, with the most popular weapon type standing as swords, but removing Hydro MC, it would be a tie between swords and catalysts. The least popular weapon type of Hydro is Claymore, with literally not 1 character using it, love that, and proportionately the tie is removed, and Catalyst takes another victory for most popular weapon type in Hydro, and with 0% no changes on the least used front. Blazing over to Pyro, the curse of the Traveler finally leaves us, and we see that the most popular weapon type in Pyro is the Polearm, with 5 characters, and the least popular weapon type is swords, with Benny once again drawing the short straw and being alone, like always. Skating over to Cryo, the most popular weapon type is swords, and the least popular is catalysts. But when accounted for proportionality, Claymores kick out swords to become the most popular weapon type, and catalysts still stay at the bottom. Now, to simply cover all bases, while it has been looked at before, I wanted to include the statistics regarding the most populated weapon type and the most populated element. So, out of the total 89 playable characters, counting each elemental MC as a different unit, the most popular weapon type by far is swords, with 24 characters wielding them overall. Now, I will say, even if we did remove each version of the Traveler, swords will be left with 19 characters and still take this victory. Similarly, when assessing the most popular elements, even without the Traveler yet picking up their elements, Pyro and Cryo both have the most amount of characters at 15 each, but with Natlin on the way, we shall see how this all shakes up. And there you have it, the most popular elements among the weapon types, and the most popular weapon types among the elements, both in raw numbers and accounting for proportionality. Now, on another note, I did want to highlight the lack of even distribution of weapons among the elements, and elements among the weapons. While the elements themselves are decently spread across the entire roster, seeing the comparison like this really shows how elements like Anemo and Hydro aren't exactly evenly distributed throughout the 5 weapon types. I mean, more than 65% of Anemo's entire roster is comprised of less than half of the weapon types, and with Hydro, almost 70% of its entire roster is also comprised of the exact same 2 weapon types, swords and catalysts. While this isn't the biggest deal and doesn't really change all too much, as the same person who is still wishing for Hoyo to add at least 1 character of each element to every region, it is something worth noting to me. But as always, what did we learn today? Nothing too useful, I hope, but fun to know regardless. Thanks for watching. And shout out to Bunuhead and Jeja Buns for supporting the channel. If you support the channel by becoming a member for 1 USD, you also get a shout out at the end of every video, just like Banu and Jeja. Thanks for watching.